The first hint of dawn bled pale gold across the Pacific when Maya Alvarez pulled her old pickup into the gravel lot beside the flight shed. The world was still half asleep, the air heavy with salt and the faint tang of diesel. Somewhere beyond the dunes, surf whispered against the cliffs, steady as breath. Maya killed the engine, grabbed her thermos, and stepped out into the chill. The cold bit pleasantly at her cheeks. It was the kind of quiet morning she loved before orders started flying, before anyone expected anything of her. Just the machines, the sea, and the rhythm of routine. Inside the shed, she flicked on the lights and began her checks. The fluorescent bulbs hummed to life, illuminating the small hangar where the Navy's range crew stored their spotter drones and maintenance gear. She moved with practiced efficiency, checking oil levels, securing fuel lines, testing control surfaces on the volunteer drone that would later run wind reads over the range. Her hands worked automatically while her mind stayed quiet, focused. She liked mechanical certainty. Bolts either fit or they didn't. Systems either came alive or they didn't. People were rarely that simple. Maya had been working part-time at the range for almost a year, ever since she'd started her aeronautical engineering degree. Between lab work, tutoring, and the hours she logged here, she scraped together enough to keep her flight lessons current. Every paycheck meant another hour in the air. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept her dream in motion. Her father used to say that flying was equal parts precision and humility. "The sky doesn't care who you are, mija," he'd tell her in that calm, measured voice that used to carry through the garage when they rebuilt the old Cessna together. "You earn every second you stay up there." He'd flown a 7 Corsairs off carriers in the Pacific, never talked much about the missions, only about the discipline. Checklists, attention, control. When he retired, he traded combat sorties for weekend aerobatics with his daughter, teaching her to read the wind by the way it pressed against the plane's skin. Those lessons had shaped the way she approached everything: methodical, quiet, steady. By 0600, the range was stirring. 2 black Navy SUVs rolled through the gate, engines rumbling low. The SEAL team filed out with their characteristic efficiency, no wasted motion, no unnecessary chatter. Maya paused in her work, watching them set up along the firing line. Even without the uniforms, you could spot special operations types a mile away. That quiet self-assurance, the way they seemed to absorb the space around them instead of announcing themselves. A small group of flight crew arrived soon after, carrying helmets and flight bags. They were the liaison pilots, naval aviators who would handle aerial spotting for the training exercise. Maya recognized the insignia on their flight suits, the call signs scrawled in Sharpie across their gear. She scanned the list pinned to the operations board. 4 aircraft scheduled for sorties across the coastline. She liked knowing who was flying, not for gossip, but because pilots tended to leave their personality in their pre-flights, cockpits cleaned or cluttered, checklists crisp or folded, a dozen tiny tells she couldn't help noticing. From the far end of the tarmac, a clipped voice echoed over the comms. "Ranger 1, this is Raven 3. We've got an avionics fault on startup. Diagnostics not clearing." The words cut through the hum of engines and conversation. Heads turned. The lead pilot, Captain Reed, if Maya remembered correctly, lifted his headset and frowned toward the source of the transmission. His posture was calm, but there was a tension behind it, the kind that came when time and weather were both closing in. He keyed his mic. "Copy that, 3. You've got 5 mics to resolve, or we scrub the run." There was a pause, a faint hiss of static, then the unmistakable frustration of a younger voice. "Sir, I've run the reset twice. It's not holding alignment. Nav displays still drifting." The captain exhaled slowly. Maya could almost feel his calculation from across the field: too much gear and manpower on standby to waste a morning, but no margin for error. He scanned the flight line, eyes narrowing, and his next words carried easily through the open comm channel. "Any combat pilots on the field?" The question hung there, sharp and impossible. A few of the SEALs exchanged puzzled looks. The other pilots were still grounded or prepping their aircraft. The only people within earshot were technicians, crew chiefs, and one civilian range assistant kneeling beside a fuel cart. Maya's wrench slipped slightly in her hand. She tightened her grip, the cold metal biting into her palm. The hum of the flight line faded beneath the pounding of her heartbeat. She wasn't supposed to even think about responding. She wasn't military, wasn't rated for combat operations. Her job was to refuel the spotter, not to answer a captain's open call. But the silence stretched on, and something in her, something shaped by years of her father's quiet, uncompromising voice, refused to let it go. Her jaw tightened. She set the wrench down with deliberate care, wiped her hands on her coveralls, and stood. The radio crackled again, sharper this time. Any combat pilots on the field? Captain Reed's voice carried across the flight line, firm and deliberate now. The air had shifted, the lazy rhythm of pre-flight checks giving way to the taut edge that comes when seconds start to matter. Maya froze halfway between the fuel cart and the hangar door. The question wasn't rhetorical anymore. Clouds had begun to roll in from the west, pushing a thin haze across the horizon. The weather brief had warned of a tightening window, and everyone on the tarmac knew that if they didn't get the reconnaissance flight up within 15 minutes, the entire exercise would have to be rescheduled. Dozens of operators, trucks, and spotters were on standby waiting for that bird to fly. One missing pilot meant the morning was about to fall apart. Captain Reed scanned the flight line, his expression unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. He was calm, but Maya recognized the kind of calm that comes from calculation, not comfort, the same look her father used to wear when troubleshooting an engine failure midair. Anyone? Reed repeated, voice hardening. Maya's stomach turned. She knew she wasn't supposed to answer. She was a civilian contractor, a part-time technician who cleaned spark plugs and refueled drones, not a combat-rated naval aviator. But the silence pressed in, heavy and humiliating, the kind that made her fingers twitch with the urge to move. Her father's words echoed unbidden in her mind. Asterisk. You don't get to pick the emergency, Mia. You only get to decide whether you're ready when it happens. Asterisk. The words hit like a switch. Before she could talk herself out of it, she heard her own voice cut across the tarmac, steady, quiet, but unmistakable. Sir, I can fly. Heads turned. The flight chief, a barrel-chested man with a sunburned neck, looked like she'd just claimed she could sprout wings. The SEALs paused mid-conversation, watching with a kind of amused disbelief. Even Captain Reed seemed caught off guard for half a heartbeat before his curiosity flickered. He walked toward her, his boots crunching over the gravel, stopping a few feet away. You're serious? He asked. Yes, sir, Maya said, keeping her tone respectful but even. I'm a licensed civilian pilot, instrument, rated. I've logged over 800 hours, mostly aerobatic and medevac contract work. I help maintain the spotter drone for this range. Reed studied her for a long moment, measuring the conviction behind her calm. Ever flown a tactical sortie? No, sir, she admitted. But I understand the protocols. I can read wind, terrain, and flight vectors. If you tell me what you need, I can do it. The downed pilot, Lieutenant Ramos, snorted from behind the open cowling of his grounded aircraft. With respect, sir, this isn't a sightseeing tour. We're flying a low-level recon pass in a live-fire corridor. That's not something you learn in a weekend. V. Before Reed could respond, Maya turned toward Ramos, her tone still polite but edged with steel. And yet your aircraft's sitting cold because you can't clear a drift error. If the mission's scrubbed, nobody flies anything. The words hung in the air like static. A couple of the SEALs exchanged quick glances, half amusement, half admiration. Reed's lips twitched, almost a smile. He turned to the flight chief. Chief, what's the liability if she flies under contractor status? The chief frowned. Off the record, sir? It's a nightmare. On the record, she's not cleared for tactical ops. Reed nodded, already weighing options. Then it stays off the record. Hack the roster. Log her as a contractor test pilot supporting calibration. If this works, it's a miracle. If it doesn't, it never happened. He turned back to Maya. You good with that? Maya's heart pounded, but her voice stayed calm. Yes, sir. Ramos shook his head in disbelief. This is insane. Probably, Reed agreed. But she's the only one who offered a solution instead of an excuse. He gestured toward the aircraft, a stripped-down turboprop recon bird parked at the edge of the taxiway. You'll be flying Raven 3. It's a stable platform once she's in the air. Just stay under the weather deck and feed telemetry to the SEAL team. Keep your altitude low, speed constant. We're testing a target corridor along the cliffs. Maya glanced toward the western ridgeline where the air shimmered faintly in the morning sunday. She could already see the subtle updraft patterns forming along the rocks. You're going to get cross-thermals off those cliffs, she said quietly. About 5 to 8 knots. If you hold steady on heading 240, they'll push you inland, compensate by 2 degrees left, or your readings will drift. Reed blinked, then turned to the flight chief. Did we have that correction in the brief? No, sir. Noted, Reed said, a spark of respect flashing in his eyes. Let's get her strapped in. Maya climbed the short ladder into the cockpit, every motion precise, deliberate. She settled into the seat, running through the familiar cadence of pre-flight checks, battery, fuel, trim, instruments. Her hands moved by memory, each switch and lever a language she'd learned over years of quiet study and late-night practice flights. The canopy closed with a solid click, sealing her in a bubble of focus. Outside, she could see the SEALs gathered near the hangar, arms folded, watching. Captain Reed stood beside the wing, headset in hand, expression unreadable. Maya took one slow breath, then another. She felt the calm slide over her, the same calm she'd found the first time her father let her take the yoke alone. Raven 3, she said into the mic, voice steady, ready for engine start. The prop spun once, twice, then caught with a throaty roar that rolled across the field. The entire flight line turned to watch as the aircraft came alive, and for the first time that morning, the silence broke, replaced by the unmistakable sound of someone who wasn't supposed to fly, taking the sky anyway. The prop bit into the wind with a rising growl as Maya eased the throttle forward. The aircraft trembled, nose dipping slightly before the lift took hold. The runway blurred beneath her gravel, paint, shadow, and then dropped away entirely. She felt that tiny, familiar moment of weightlessness, the sweet release that always came a heartbeat after rotation. Airborne. Her hands moved in rhythm with the cockpit's heartbeat, left hand trimming, right hand steady on the yoke, eyes flicking between horizon and instruments. The checklist played silently in her head: power set, climb rate stable, gear up, flaps to 0, torque holding steady. The altimeter unwound to 500 feet. Then 6. She made a small correction, a fingertip's worth of rudder pressure, just enough to keep the nose true against the coastal crosswind. The ocean stretched wide and metallic under her. The early sun glanced off the surface in blinding shards of white, every reflection shifting as the plane banked gently toward the west. To the north, the cliffs rose out of the water in rough lines, their dark faces throwing warm light back at her through the haze. The morning was so clear she could almost feel the air's texture, the fine tremor of updrafts curling off the rock, the subtle drag of onshore wind. Raven 3, confirm altitude 1,000 and holding, came Captain Reed's voice through the headset. Confirmed, Maya replied, her tone even, clipped, professional. 1,000 AGL, speed 145, heading 238. Her right hand brushed over the sensor panel, bringing the targeting feed online. A small monitor flickered to life beside the instrument cluster, painting the landscape below in clean geometric lines. The mission brief was simple. Validate a moving target's thermal signature. Provide real-time vector data to the SEAL sniper teams positioned inland. But simplicity in theory never survived contact with air currents. Below, A convoy of black shapes ATVs carrying the SEALs moved like ants along the edge of the cliffs. Her job was to keep the airborne optics steady enough for their data link to stay locked. Any drift, any jitter, and the targeting algorithm would fall out of sync. She breathed steadily, talking herself through each adjustment under her breath. Power 90, 2%, wind shift 10 degrees port, trim down a hair, there. The hum of the engine vibrated through her ribs, a steady pulse she could feel in her bones. It reminded her of flying with her father, when he'd rest his hand lightly on the throttle and say, asterisk, feel her, don't fight her. The airplane knows what it wants to do, you just listen and agree at the right time. Asterisk? She smiled faintly at the memory, and then the wind hit. It wasn't much at first, just a sharp bump under her left wing, but it built fast. The gust layer she'd warned about had risen sooner than forecasted, curling off the cliffs in a jagged wall of turbulence. The aircraft yawed right, nose pitching as the sensor feed flashed red. Telemetry drift, called the comms officer from the ground. You're losing lock on the target. I've got it, Maya said, voice tightening. Her mind flipped through options standard correction wouldn't hold in this wind. She needed a hybrid fix, drop the nose, roll into the gust, add a short power burst to ride through the thermal instead of fighting it. Non-standard, risky, but right. She banked left hard, reducing throttle for half a breath, then slammed it back to 98% just as the updraft hit. The aircraft bucked once, then stabilized. The sensor feed blinked green again, lock restored. The telemetry graph flattened out like a calm heartbeat. Reed's voice came through the headset, low but audible. Nice correction, Raven 3. You reading stable? Stable, sir. Adjusted course 240 to compensate for thermal drift. Sensor holding steady. Below, the SEAL's voices cut in over the radio, short bursts of coordination, target distances, confirmation codes. Through her viewport, Maya could see one of the sniper teams taking position along the ridge, sunlight glinting off a scope. She visualized the geometry, her altitude, their angle, the target's movement, and fed the correction in real time. Wind correction factor point, 8 left, she said. Target crossing field of fire in 5, 4, 3, mark. The report from the sniper's rifle reached her a second later, muffled by distance. The data feed blinked with confirmation. Hit. The comms channel filled with terse acknowledgement. Solid vector, Raven 3, perfect timing. Maya exhaled slowly. Beneath the adrenaline, a calm spread through her. This was what she'd chased for years, the union of precision and instinct, math and motion. The airplane and the world in perfect temporary balance. She made 2 more passes, holding steady as the teams below completed their drills. The turbulence eased with the rising Sunday. When Captain Reed's voice came again, it carried something new approval threaded through command. Raven 3, return to base. Copy that, she replied, banking gently toward the airstrip. The descent was smooth, practiced. She dropped flaps, throttled back, lined up with the strip's faded centerline. Wheels kissed gravel, bounced once, then settled. The prop spun down, its roar fading into the rhythmic tick of cooling metal. Outside, the crew waited. SEALs, technicians, and officers stood watching as she climbed out, helmet tucked under one arm. Captain Reed was at the front, hands on his hips, eyes narrowed at the aircraft's telemetry tablet. He scrolled through the footage: flight path, sensor lock, correction data, his jaw tightening as he absorbed what he was seeing. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, "Who's that?" Maya paused at the bottom of the ladder, her gloves still streaked with oil and salt. 8 pairs of eyes were on her, some skeptical, some stunned, a few respectful. The wind tugged at her coveralls, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and ocean spray. She didn't say anything. She just met the captain's gaze, steady and unflinching, and waited for whatever came next. The debrief tent smelled faintly of salt, gun oil, and coffee gone cold. Canvas walls shifted in the wind, their seams ticking softly like the pulse of an engine cooling down. The mission board was covered in screenshots and telemetry graphs, all bathed in the pale light of the projector. Maya sat near the back, shoulders straight but hands clasped loosely in her lap, her flight suit streaked with oil and dust. Around her, uniformed men and women spoke in clipped tones, analyzing data in a language she knew but had never been invited to speak within. Captain Reed stood at the front, his flight cap tucked under one arm, posture sharp as a drawn line. Raven 3's telemetry shows a 94% reduction in targeting latency, he said, scrolling through the data with a practiced flick. Spotting vector deviation dropped by nearly half, and wind compensation was on point exact to the meter. He paused, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. That's the cleanest corridor validation we've had in 6 months. A few murmurs rippled through the room. One of the SEAL team leaders, a tall, quiet operator with a scar down his jaw, nodded once. Best real-time corrections I've had from the air. We didn't have to re-zero once. The flight chief crossed his arms. With all due respect, sir, she had no clearance to be up there. Civilian status, no tactical certification. We got lucky today. If command hears about this, we'll all be writing incident reports until Christmas. Reed didn't flinch. Maybe, but we didn't get lucky. We got competent. His tone was even, the kind that silenced argument without raising volume. She noticed the thermals off the cliffs before any of us did. Without that correction, the mission would have been scrubbed, and you all know it. The chief shifted, his jaw tightening. Still, it's a procedural nightmare. Then it stays off the record, Reed said. But I'm not about to ignore the skill that just saved us a day's worth of wasted resources. He looked over his shoulder at Maya. You can stop pretending to be invisible, Alvarez. You just flew rings around 3 commissioned pilots. The room turned toward her. Maya felt the weight of their stares but stayed composed. Sir, I only did what needed to be done. Anyone could have made the same call. Maybe, Reed said, but they didn't. The silence stretched again, softer this time, filled with reluctant respect. Reed leaned back against the table, arms crossed. Here's the situation. We've got an ongoing series of exercises coming up live fire, mixed teams. We need spotter pilots who understand both the math and the instinct. You're not military, which means you can move between units without the politics. It's contract work, dangerous, unofficial, well compensated. You'd train alongside us, work under my oversight, and log hours that count toward your civilian certs. Maya blinked, the offer hitting harder than she expected. You're serious? Completely. You proved something today. Not just that you can fly, but that you can think tactically. That's rare. The chief exhaled through his nose, muttering something under his breath, but Reed didn't acknowledge it. His eyes stayed on Maya. You don't have to answer now, but I'd think about it. You've got the kind of instincts we can't teach. The meeting dissolved after that. The SEALs filed out first, giving her brief nods as they passed. One of them, a sniper from the ridge, paused and tapped 2 fingers to his forehead in a quiet salute. The gesture wasn't official, but it meant more than any certificate she'd earned. Later, as the light softened into gold, Maya found herself walking toward the small office at the end of the hangar. Inside sat Chief Warrant Officer Hale, one of the senior aviators who'd been silent during the debrief. His hair was silver, his flight jacket worn thin at the seams. He looked up as she entered, a faint smile in his eyes. You're Arturo Alvarez's daughter, he said simply. Maya froze. You knew my father? Hale nodded. Flew with him once. Back when the Navy still ran A7 seconds off the Coral Sea. He had that same quiet edge you showed today. Never said much, but when things went sideways, he was the calmest man in the cockpit. He paused, studying her face. You've got his hands. He used to talk about how flying wasn't just control, it was conversation. You listen more than you force. I saw that out there. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. The lump in her throat surprised her. Hale reached into his desk and slid a small notepad toward her. If you take the captain's offer, call this number first. It's the mentorship channel for civilian contractors. It'll keep you in the right airspace and out of unnecessary trouble. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me. Just keep your father's rule, stay ready. By the time she stepped outside, the sky had turned amber and violet. The wind carried the scent of the sea and the faint hum of engines cooling in the hangar. She walked until she reached the cliff edge overlooking the corridor she'd flown that morning. The ocean stretched endlessly below, the same expanse her father used to call time's honest sky, asterisk. Behind her, the echo of Captain Reed's voice lingered from the tent. Asterisk. We'll call when we need someone who doesn't just fly the plane, but thinks like the team. Asterisk. Maya slipped her flight log into her pocket, fingers brushing against the edges of the worn paper. For a long moment, she just stood there, the wind pulling at her hair, the horizon burning gold. Then she smiled, small, steady, certain, and for the first time, she began to picture what her life might look like if she said yes.